Hello everyone, Miss Goolsby here. Today we're going to cover chapter 4, which is medical terminology. This is a fairly short chapter and a lot of it you probably already know the basics of. The objectives are to identify, define, and use basic word elements individually and within medical terms. So basically telling you how to break down words to figure out what something means if you don't know what something already means medically. Demonstrate proper pronunciation of medical terms and unique plural endings, because some of the endings are always, the words are always ended the same with the same letters. And lastly, to use common medical abbreviations and symbols and explain how items on the do not use list can cause problems. So medical terminology, the reason why it's important for us as healthcare workers to know the meanings of these terms is because as a healthcare worker, you're going to hear these kind of words constantly in the healthcare setting, no matter if you're in the hospital or a clinic. People will always be using these words, whether it's nurses or doctors or lab techs or other phlebotomists, or maybe the patient even talks about medical words. So you need to be familiar with how to break these words down. So starting out with word roots. A word root is also called a word stem, in case you've heard it said that way. The root is a word or word element that expresses the basic or general meaning of the term. So basically it's the base where other word elements are attached to that particular word. If you will look on page 127 in your book, I do want you to look at the key point that is in the right-hand column. It says a word root typically indicates a tissue, organ, body system, color, condition, substance, or structure. For example, the root word phlebe means vein, a body structure. Consequently, whenever you see the root word phlebe, you know the term has something to do with veins. So this will help you when you're breaking down these words. Some medical terms have more than one word root. The term thrombophlebitis is made up of the root word phlebe, meaning vein, and the word root thromb, meaning clot. So it has two word roots. So it's a vein and a clot. Look at the key point that is also in that same right-hand column on that same page. At the very bottom of that column, it says occasionally both Greek and Latin word roots have the same meaning. For example, and this is one that you need to know, the Greek root neph, which is N-E-P-H-R, and the Latin root ren, R-E-N, both mean kidney. So it depends on whether they are saying it in a Greek form or a Latin form, but that is one you definitely need to be familiar with, is neph and ren. They both have to do with the kidneys. Okay, so look at the example back on your slide now. It gives you an example of the root word was phlebe. The meaning of phlebe, we already know, is a vein, which is the body structure. So an example would be phlebitis. Itis means inflammation. So that's how you break that word down. Phlebe meaning vein, itis meaning inflammation. So this is inflammation of the vein. That's what that means. Now let's talk about prefixes. Prefixes come before a word root. This modifies the meaning of the word root by adding information such as presence, absence, location, number, or size. And an example that they give you is the prefix a. A means without. So an example, anuclear means without a nucleus. And there are some common medical word roots in table 4.1 in your textbook This is on page 127 and 128 of your book. There are a couple that I would suggest that you make a little star by, just because you're going to hear these fairly often. The first one is adip, which is fat. An example is adipose. That means fat tissue, okay? So adip, fat, adipose. Another one that you may hear frequently would be bar at the bottom, which means weight. So bariatric, that has to do with weight. So if someone has had bariatric surgery, that would be weight loss surgery. Another one is on the other column. Billy means bile. Bilirubin would be the substance you would see in the blood sample if someone has if they have liver issues going on, then they may have bilirubin that is high, and in this case their sample would be icteric. Icteric means that it is going to be that amber color. Okay, flip over to page 128, and there's a couple on here I want you to look at. Almost to the bottom of that first column is hemat, H-E-M-A-T. That meaning is blood. So hematology would be the study of blood. Leuc is white, so leukocyte is white blood cell. Over on the other column, ox means oxygen, and so an example would be hypoxia. Down at the bottom, you see tox, which means poison. So toxicology would be the study of these poisons. Okay, some common medical prefixes are on table 4.2 in your book, and this is on page 129 and 130. It gives you the example that your slide gives you, which is a or an. Either one of those mean without. So your slide said anuclear, which means without a nucleus. Your book says anaerobic, which means without oxygen. Okay, so that's an example there. There's lots of examples. I'm not going to ask you to memorize all of them, but I would suggest you glance over them, because these are clues as to how you would break these words down. Next is suffixes. This means, the prefixes came before the word root. Suffixes are the end of the word, the root word's ending. So it follows the word root and changes or adds to its meaning. To determine the meaning of a medical term, you first identify the meaning of the suffix. So like I see, ick means pertaining to. So an example is gastric. So this means gastric, whatever it is, whether it's gastric fluid, whatever it is, it's pertaining to the stomach. Okay, because gastric is the stomach. Okay, on the next slide, we have combining vowels and forms. A vowel, which is often an O or an I, is added between two word roots or a word root and a suffix to make the pronunciation easier. A word root combined with a vowel is a combining form. Not needed if the suffix begins with a vowel. So all this is determinant on that. So let's look at this example. Path, that's your word root. O is your combining form vowel, okay? Suffix is logy. So the combo form is patho, and then logy is the study of. Patho's disease, logy is the study of. So pathology is the study of disease. So that should kind of help you with breaking some of these words down. And the same as with the other suffixes, you can see on page, let's see, what page? Oh, table 4.3, which is on page 130 and 131. There are some examples of your common medical suffixes. One that I want you to highlight is on that first column. It says emia, E-M-I-A. That is a blood condition. So, for example, anemia means they have what? Go ahead and think of it before I butt in. So, anemia would be like they have low blood volume. Okay, it's a blood condition. Another one that you may hear is megaly, which is right beside it. Megaly means large. So if they have splenomegaly, that means the O is the combining form, okay, and spleen is the actual organ spleen. So splenomegaly means they have an enlarged spleen, okay, so that's just how to break it down. Lysis, which is right above that, lysis means breakdown or destruction. So hemolysis means the breakdown of red blood cells, okay? Okay, discrepancies in the classification of word elements. Texts vary in how they classify word elements of medical terms. Some word elements may be classified one way in one term and a different way in another. So it's important to be able to identify the meaning of the word than it is to identify its classification. So as far as you go, you mainly need to know what it means. So look at this example at the bottom of your slide. Pathology, which is pathology when you say it all the way out, the study of disease, that's the word and the meaning. Myopathy, which is myopathy, that is the disease of the muscle, because myo would be muscle. Okay. Unique plural endings. So unique plural endings, the plural form means more than one. So in some ways, you're going to, instead of just adding an S or an ES like we want to think, that is means more than one, we have unique plural endings, and they follow the rules of the Greek or the Latin form, whichever one they originated from. So look at your slide. If the word ends in A, then the plural is going to be AE. For example, vena cava, the plural is vena cavi. If the word ends in EN, then the plural ending is INA. So lumen turns into lumina. IS, if it ends in IS, it turns into ES. So crisis turns into crises. If it ends in IX, the plural is ES or ICES. Like appendix turns into appendices. NX turns into NGES. Like phalanx turns into phalanges. ON turns into A. Like protozoan turns into protozoa. Turns into A, like ovum is one egg, ova is many. US turns into I, so nucleus turns into nuclei. And so there are some examples on table 4.4 in your book on page 133, some examples of the unique plural endings. And also, there is a labeling exercise in 4.2 in your workbook that you can look at to kind of work on these. Pronunciation and spelling, they can affect the meaning. So basic English pronunciation rules apply to most terms. Some terms may have more than one acceptable pronunciation. For example, hemophilia can be pronounced hemophilia or hemophilia. Some terms that are spelled differently are pronounced the same. For example, ilium, which means hip bone, is pronounced the same as ileum, which means the small intestine. So you have to take it into account what context they are using this in. Some examples of pronunciations are on table 4.5 in your book on page 133. And there is a labeling exercise on 4.3 in your workbook that can also help you with these. Okay, this is your pretty much the same chart that is in your book on table 4.5. So it shows you how the letters change into the pronunciations, and it gives you examples. And so each of these, all of these are also gone over in that chart in table 4 or 5 in your textbook. And the same thing is here, like how they pronounce the word. One that I really want to talk about is the PN. So you pronounce only the N sound when it's at the start of a word. You pronounce both letters separately when it's in the middle of a word. Okay, so for example, it's at the beginning of pneumonia, so you only do the N. You still spell it with the PN, but you only say pneumonia. Look at the one right below that. The PN is in the middle of the word. So the first one is dyspnea. The second one is apnea. So you're going to say the P and the N both, but separately. So look over these so that you can kind of understand different pronunciations that you might hear or see. Okay, abbreviations and symbols. These are used to save time, space, and paperwork. It's a way to shorten words or phrases. And a symbol is an object or a sign that represents the word or the phrase. So it gives you some examples. Also, if you are looking at your textbook again on page 134 all the way to 138, pages 134 to 138. This is table 4-6, which give common healthcare abbreviations. I am going to tell you some that I would mark in your book if I were you. The first one is ABGs, that's arterial blood gases. You are likely to hear this, especially if you do sticks in the emergency room. ABO, this is your blood group system. Skip down some and look at AMI. AMI is acute myocardial infarction. That is another way to say heart attack. BS is blood sugar. BPM, right above that, is beats per minute. C stands for Celsius, centigrade. CSF, this stands for spinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. Sorry, I was looking down at the next section. Okay, CVA is cerebrovascular accident or stroke. DIC, this is disseminated intravascular coagulation. You may hear this if a patient is in the trauma unit. DNR is do not resuscitate. So you need to know not to do CPR on that patient if they have a DNR. DOB is date of birth. ED is emergency department. It used to always be called emergency room, ER, but now they have changed all the way across the board to ED. It's hard for everybody to get used to that grew up saying ER. Down at the bottom some, you'll also see ER for emergency room. Okay, FUO, fever of unknown origin. As a phlebotomist, you will more than likely be asked to stick a blood culture on every patient that has a fever of unknown origin. They want to see if they're septic, because a lot of times when a patient has a fever of unknown origin, that might be the case. They might have a bacteria in their bloodstream. Over on the next page, like if you're looking at your textbook, flip over. On the next page, look at IP. That stands for inpatient. They don't have IC. Yeah, they do. At the very top. They don't have it actually by itself, but see how it says HX, ICU? That HX stands for history. ICU stands for intensive care unit. Okay, we already said myocardial infarction. Okay, on the next column, OGTT, oral glucose tolerance test. This may be something that's ordered on a patient. You will more than likely have to draw a couple of these a day if you work in a hospital, if not more. PB, that stands for lead. PIC, that stands for peripheral inserted central catheter. Okay, if somebody has a PIC line, that means that the nurse draws the blood from the PIC line if they are using it. Go to the next page. PP stands for postprandial. So this means you would draw the patient's blood after they've had a meal. PPBS, this is postprandial blood sugar. So it's not just BS. BS is blood sugar, but postprandial blood sugar is different. This means you're drawing it after they've had a meal. Protime, that's prothrombin time. QNS, that means quantity not sufficient. And notice it can be abbreviated two ways. All caps QNS or little q period, N period, S period. Those all mean that there was not enough blood drawn on the patient, so they need to recollect. REQ is requisition. On the next column, staph stands for staphylococcus. Stat, whether it's all caps or all lowercase, that means immediately. So if you have a stat label to draw on a patient, then you need to draw it before everybody else. It means it needs done immediately. Skip down a little bit. TAT, this is turnaround time. This means the time between when that was ordered and the time that the result was turned out. So that's how long it takes overall. TRIG, which is on the next page. It may be abbreviated TRIG, TG, or TGL. It stands for triglycerides. UA, either all caps or lowercase, is urinalysis. URI is upper respiratory infection. UTI is a urinary tract infection. VAD is a vascular access device. Okay, below that on your slide, you see there are some other symbols. So this is on page 139 in your textbook, table 4.8. You can see that there are many different symbols in the healthcare system, but the ones that are relating to your slide, the plus sign literally means plus or positive. The minus sign means minus or negative. Then you have the less than, equal to or less than, equals, greater than, greater to or less than, greater to, equal to or greater than, excuse me, I misspoke like 5 times. Okay, the number sign means number or pound. And then on your slide you see you have the at symbol and the and symbol, both. Okay, the Joint Commission's do not use list. To help reduce the number of medical errors related to incorrect interpretation of terminology, the Joint Commission created a list of dangerous abbreviations, symbols, and acronyms that must be included on a do not use list by every organization that the Joint Commission accredits. This list applies to all orders, all medication-related documentation that is handwritten, entered into the computer, or written on pre-printed forms. The list applies to handwritten lab reports, but printed and electronic lab reports are exempted. So, on table 4.9, which is on page 140 in your textbook, you do need to make a list of these that are on the official do not use list. And it's because they can be mistaken for, like, letters. If they're handwritten, they can be mistaken. For example, IU, somebody may write a U and it looks like a V. And so instead of saying that that's international units, it may look like that they're trying to say intravenous or IV. So you need to make note that you don't write any of these out because they can be mistaken for each other. So it also tells you what you do instead. You write it all the way out. So like IU, you would write international units. You would write unit. QD, you would write daily. QOD, you would write every other day. a trailing zero, like the decimal point, if it's missed, if you don't see, if it's x.0 and they don't see the decimal, you write x milligrams. Lack of a leading zero, like if it's supposed to be point x, then you would write out 0.x, okay? And always make sure that zero is there. MS, that can mean morphine sulfate or magnesium sulfate. So you have to write specifically out which one of those you're talking about. MSO4 and MgSO4, they can be confused. So you write all the way out magnesium sulfate. So these are just a few, but these are the main ones that they released in 2016 because medical errors were ranking as the third leading cause of death in the United States. And so they had to make a way to eliminate these errors or help eliminate these errors. This is the same table 4.9 that is on the, in your textbook. So there is a true false activity in your homework that is on 4.3 in the workbook. And so that will help you. This is the chart that will help you with that. So like I said, this was a fairly short chapter. It is just a way for you to help break down words. And I think when you realize which parts of the word you're supposed to look at first, that will help you tremendously to be able to figure things out in the medical world. The NACLS entry competencies, we've already covered those. So I will see you next time.